Welcome everyone to our Barriers for Breakfast video cast. We put these out at Setzer Group across YouTube, LinkedIn Live, and also Facebook Live. And boy, have I been looking forward to this one today. Here with my friend and colleague, Dr. Erin Lynch at Winston-Salem State University. And we have been spending a lot of time outside of this podcast talking about sort of these three pandemics that Ken Burns talks about, like how's innovation going at an HBCU to and through COVID? How are we all wrapping our heads around racism and anti-racism education, diversity, equity, and inclusion? What does it mean for innovators? And then finally, we're both in the education and learning business, and we find ourselves combating social media myths, societal myths, all sorts of things that for a living, we really focus on research and empirical evidence. And, I'm going to challenge Erin today. I think we do a good job of it, but we don't do a great job communicating it. And that's the hard part, because we have a society that likes sound bites and 40-second memes and GIFs, and it's hard to communicate real value. So Erin, absolutely thrilled to have you on the vidcast today. And let's just jump right in with, why are you in this work? We'd like to hear your story. Why does innovation or research, why does it matter?
Absolutely. So personally, it matters for me because I see what it does for improving the lives of children. So I'm a K-12 teacher, right? So that's where I started, special education. And just the longer I stayed in that business, the more and more I realized it wasn't what I was doing in the classroom, but it was me becoming a pre-service teacher to be able to, or becoming a trainer of pre-service teachers to do a better job for the children in K-12. And then I get into higher ed and I realized it wasn't me being a professor, but it was me bringing in grant and research dollars, right? To help change policy, to help, put, research to practice, to help prepare teachers for the classroom, to better strengthen their skill sets for our students. And then of course, from that into now I need to be able to help others, right? To be able to bring in research dollars to do this exact thing. So it's just been like this snowball effect of how important research is just all the way down to the K-12 level. And so I've just moved up through the ranks to be able to continue that. And I've been blessed enough to be able to serve a number of universities in that regard as a research administrator, and WSSU is reaping the benefit of my passion right now. So yeah, so research is just deeply embedded into how we make things better, right? Yeah. And so few people can speak that language. That's why I fell into it.
I'd love to build on that, on how we communicated. I saw this great thing on social media the other day that people will say, I've studied it, right? And then somebody will go, well, did you run a trial? Did you validate the results? Was it peer reviewed? Stop saying that you studied it, because what you basically did was read a social media meme. It aligned or didn't align with your own value system, and then you presented it as research.
Right.
And on the flip side of that, I mean, you're into the deep work. I mean, you're into research grants, you're into development of patents. I think we have a branding problem with researchers. I think it's not that they're not talented or skilled. What's your take on how they need to communicate what's out there?
Yeah, so a colleague of mine calls me the missing link, right? Because I can speak research to the average American, right? And I think sometimes as researchers, we are so deep into our niche, right? We're so skilled in being able to do the methodological components, that make us really good as researchers, that we forget about the simple things of being able to communicate that, right? And so, yeah, we disseminate it, right? But are we really sharing that with the general public in such a way that it's accessible? And sometimes we forget that our research is intended to be accessible. And so, we oftentimes get into these loops where we're just sharing with each other, sharing with other academicians, and that becomes extremely problematic. So I think maybe, some media courses might be nice for researchers, right? Showing us just simple approachability techniques when it comes to talking about the things that we get really passionate about in our work. So there's a disconnect there, and I think that's because interpersonal communication it's not a natural thing, right? It's a
Right.
skill. Like you have to learn it. And
Yeah.
so that's just not one of the things we often teach in, in the academy when we're going through those PhD courses. But
That's
okay,
right.
now how do we communicate what we're doing, right? So you get the communication course like freshman year, in undergrad, but like that's it. So yeah, I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I love that because, we had never met until this past year, and meeting you in person, that was my first reaction. We've built this podcast on if we went to a bar or a conference, what would it be like to connect with this person? And I was
Right.
like, she's a researcher, because there was this sort of high level interpersonal, and there was also this ability to cut through the chase of things we were working on
Yeah.
together, and sort of like, Bryan, this is what it really means for the people we're going to serve.
Absolutely.
And that's the whole thing. People, a lot of smart people can get in a room, but if they can't sell their idea, if they can't communicate their concept, people will just kind of walk away, and they won't have a sense of, what the value
Absolutely.
is.
Absolutely. And I think that's the importance of those elevator pitches, right? So
Mhm.
being able to pitch your research
Right.
in, in a meaty and yet condensed way that
Right.
someone else can walk away with, what? I liked that idea. I
Yeah.
want to hear more about that, right? Like
Right.
yeah, that's a skill. That's a skill.
And it's, I share with you a little bit that my wife does some work at RTI, and she's doing a lot of the social media branding for their researchers. And one of the things that's coming out of that is you also want people to take away that elevator pitch or that single sentence when they start talking to a grantor or a funder.
Absolutely.
So there's real dollars and value behind
Yeah.
this communication thing. And if
Yeah.
you can't get there, those resources won't go to you. So it's a
Yeah.
good segue for like what you're up to with innovation and research. I mean, I see over your shoulder, we could talk about at length what's happened since your arrival, kind of what's happened historically. How do you go about communicating the value of WSSU and the work that you're doing? Tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about what's going on.
Yeah, so we have had a phenomenal last 2 years in research. We are a regional teaching institution. Um, we are one of 17 schools in the system, of which I want to say of which about half have some sort of research intensive initiative.
Mhm.
So we are not yet research intensive. We are what we like to say, call ourselves our emerging research to
Mhm.
institution.
Right.
And so we have really decided at WSSU that research is a core value to what makes us a institution that produces students and citizens who can be socially just and civically engaged.
Mhm.
And so all of the research that we do at WSSU is deeply, deeply ingrained with concepts of social justice, concepts
Mhm.
of humanistic work, concepts of economic uplift. So everything we're doing in the research field is dedicated to changing and improving the lives of people who are within the African American community and beyond. So we had a strong identity for who we were as an institution, right? So our motto is, enter, learn, depart to serve. And
Mhm.
so our research is deeply connected to that identity, that, we are helping prepare students to serve a greater good by being critically minded and engaged in this research work, right? And so, what does that mean? That means that we're developing patents that are going to be life-changing, right? We're developing new techniques that are going to be impactful in particular communities. We're developing strategies to improve the economic mobility of our region, right? Which then impacts the entire state of North Carolina. So our research is deeply tied to our identity as an institution and the passions of our researchers. And because we've tapped into that passion, like our numbers have just gone out the roof. Like I was just looking at our numbers this morning. We jumped just this year alone, $93 million in proposals. And before I got here, I think we had tapped out at 60 million in proposals, right? We were doing about 14 million in new awards. Right now, we're sitting at like 52 million in new awards. So, I mean, we've been doing some really, really great work, just reconnecting the importance of what research does, and that's changing lives and helping people.
I love so much in that thread. I think back to the three pandemics, taking a moment since your arrival to
Mhm.
focus in the social justice domain, to align it to mission, to combat misinformation, and to think about, well, if anybody should lead sort of being anti-racist and making sure that we have strong DEI connections to our work, it should be an HBCU.
Absolutely.
So throughout all this success, I mean, I think our listeners would be curious about, they've got big ideas, they want to get them out to market. And a lot of times from a BIPOC perspective and how they might impact both revenue, people, planet, sort of a triple bottom line approach.
Mhm.
I do not want to get you into a bad competitive space, but we're here with Erin Lynch, Dr. Erin Lynch from Winston-Salem State on our Berries for Breakfast podcast. And the question I have for her is, if she had to give me three things that aspiring researchers or aspiring innovators can really do to be that missing link between research and storytelling, are there a few things that listeners could do better?
Absolutely. So I'm a real fan of the golden circle, right? So researchers really need to remember that they need to start with the why, right? So why is the research important? And you see this in various agencies, right? And it's called the significance, it's called the broader impacts, right? It's called the intellectual merits. Well, no, that's not so much the why, but broader impacts. And so researchers need to always start with their why, right? And sometimes we get caught up in, oh, what I'm doing, no, why is what you're doing so significant, right? Why is it so important? Why would somebody want to fund it? Why do you need a patent to be able to expand it, right? And so that's the first thing. Absolutely start with the why, right? The second is remember who you're doing it for. And so you go from the why to the who, which other grant agencies are always asking about too, right? Who's your population? Who are you helping? And so remembering who you're doing this work for is important. And when you start with those first two things, the third component of what you're doing has a much deeper context. And I think when you're presenting that to potential funders, when you're presenting that to other collaborators, when you're trying to build consortiums and teams, right, and to get stakeholders, buy-in, starting with that why, talking about who you're helping, and then what you plan to do with it. I mean, you can't go wrong in that order with those three things. So, and that definitely takes practice. It takes practice to be able to pitch that.
I love that taxonomy of why, what, and who, from a standpoint of checking those boxes so people can follow a story.
Yeah.
When we had a chance to get together in person on campus, I came to you with this pitch around, we had some work going on campus around an equity and entrepreneurship lab, and we really wanted it to focus on bringing out the untapped genius, the work going on at the university into market. And so I know you're in a lot of different HBCU consortiums. You're also in a lot of national think tanks and work going on there. Why is it so important that Winston-Salem make this move to commercialize and innovate products, patents, services?
Yeah.
Why does it matter?
Yeah, so not just WSU. So I just wrote a book chapter about this. So it's not just WSU, it's just all HBCUs. We all need to start moving into this space, right? And so, what we're seeing is, state dollars, donor money, that's not long money. That's not money that's going to, inevitably going to sustain us. So we have to find other entrepreneurial ventures to be able to sustain what we're doing, right? We've gone from, I want to say at one point at 150 HBCUs. Now we're down to anywhere between 95 to 105, depending on, the accrediting numbers.
Right.
And so our schools are closing. And so with our schools closing, primarily because they don't have the funds to support themselves, right? Through this self-preservation theory, we're missing out. And so it's important for, WSSU as well as other HBCUs, to get into this space so that we can capitalize off of our own intellectual capital to benefit our institution and our communities. And so it's critically important that we engage in the development and conceptualization of ideas that we can take to patent, that we can take to market. Granted, the research tells us it takes about 10 years before an institution can even, benefit, from a patent, unless you're a Oregon or a Stanford, they have these yeah, these big time patents, right? And creating Google and Nike and
Mhm.
Gatorade.
Right.
Yeah, so we need to start getting into that space for our own self-preservation, and that's critically important. So that's why WSSU is moving that way.
That's great. We're here today on the Berries for Breakfast live vidcast with Dr. Erin Lynch from Winston-Salem State University. And we've been talking about, the big whys and why she's in this work, kind of what it looks like at Winston-Salem State. For those following the vidcast, you can kind of see over her shoulder the success they've had in the last couple of years. And we're also touching on this notion of the three pandemics and, being to and through COVID, to and through vaccination, talking about anti-racism and diversity, equity, inclusion, education, and then certainly the role education plays in combating some misinformation. And so one of the things that I really want to get into with Erin, because I had the chance to get into it with her privately, and I would love her listeners to kind of hear sort of this notion of clumsy allyship that I brought to her when we were talking. And I said, Erin, I don't know any other way to be as a white male than to get into the conversations, to hold the space, to think about times when I need to seed it and times when I need to influence it. And how would you advise me, to be an ally in this moment? And I loved what you said in person, where it's like, Bryan, just act in that way, be humble, and make sure that as you're kind of going through it, you check in, but it's going to take all of us really to meet this moment. And so
Yeah.
I think HBCUs have an interesting paradox. I was really struck by what you said about self-preservation, because that mindset can sometimes limit innovation. And I know you and I have talked about it at length of how we involve more people, get more people to the table from all backgrounds. But I'd love for you to kind of riff on that. What are you seeing? What's the role of all of us elevating the HBCU experience?
Yeah. So I think we need to make sure that we're all starting from the same playbook, that HBCUs are relevant, right? And I feel like that there are still pockets and sects of society that really believe that HBCUs are a segregationist perspective or segregationist approach to education, and they're not, right? So, we look at the historical context of what HBCUs were developed for. They were developed to educate, right? Populations of society, Black communities that were prevented from having access to high quality education, right? And post-secondary high quality education. And then the second layer as to why they were created, a lot of our HBCUs were created as land grant institutions, which were specifically designed to integrate agricultural research into the collegiate experience to benefit society. So our institutions are profoundly relevant in who they educate, right? What they're there to educate, and what they're supposed to teach our citizens. And then how we contribute to a global society, not just an American society, but a global society, with who we graduate. And so I think that if we can start at least in that premise, right, that HBCUs are relevant and significant and profoundly impactful, then everything we can do moving forward as collaborators is cake, right? I still feel like sometimes there's this upward battle with some of our larger institutions, who are not HBCUs, and they just want to come and work with us, right? For a small little portion of a project. Oh, we just need you all to recruit Black faces, as opposed to, we know that you all do, great work in the community. We want you at the table at the beginning of this project to help us to consider how we can authentically engage targeted communities. And so I think that's a really, really important place to start before we can move forward in any type of allyship, an authentic allyship, right? I mean, that's the other thing that we talk about, so just being able to listen to the lived experiences of these institutions, because each of these institutions has a different lived experience. HBCUs are not a monolith. We all have very different identities. And so valuing those things is going to be really, really important to being able to pull out the innovation that lies in each one of them, right? So that's going to be really, really important, I think.
What I love about that thread is it bleeds into a mutual interest around design thinking, a mutual interest around liberatory design thinking, where we're setting ourselves up to notice who's involved, notice what their strengths are and roles are,
Absolutely.
and then how do you catalyze it amidst, healing justice or where we are as a country with this pandemic. So because I know you, I'm curious how you're balancing your bias towards action and also healing. Like what do we need to be doing now on the way forward? Because I think both of those tensions are in place, right? Like
Yeah.
those of us that are doers and want to innovate have a certain disposition, and we're going through a very unique time. How are you balancing it in your own work?
Yeah. So my personal work has really been about providing information from an empirical and objective way, right? Um, we talk about, that third pandemic, the misinformation, right? And sometimes it's so frustrating when you're trying to show that lived experiences have validity, right? That lived experiences have credibility. Um, because people, like you mentioned, you are so quick to, well, I'm just going to tune into what validates what I already believe, right?
Right.
And
Right.
and that might not be listening to the lived experience of somebody else. So my work most recently has been really, really focused on the empirical part, like really being able to provide objective numbers, like, look, this is what we are experiencing. Here are the numbers to support it, right? Here's the evidence to support that inequity at HBCUs, because of a larger, macro system, exists, right? HBCUs are woefully underfunded. We've seen this in the news time and time again now with these states that have been losing these lawsuits about underfunding their HBCUs in comparison to their, flagship schools and prominently white institutions. So so we've been experiencing these things as HBCUs for years, but now finally the numbers are being put to the story to show in a much more objective way, that it's true. And so my work has been really focused in on that, and I feel like that's one of the better ways to counter this misinformation, fake news thing that people have adopted, to disregard information that challenges their worldviews. So I've been really, really focused on that personally. And then, of course, for my researchers in the institution, really trying to find opportunities for them to capitalize on their innovation, to benefit society as well. So that's where my work has been the last few years. And I'm not really sure if the social justice component has pushed that more than anything, but I'm sure it has an underlying an underlying motivation. It's been an underlying motivation for me to do that.
No, that's helpful. And what I really take away from that is that there's a steadiness to innovation that I think people kind of always cast as fast or rapid, but
Yeah.
part of it is building the capacity, the understanding, the discipline to check your resources, to think about who funded it, to think about, who can be involved and what are their roles based on their lived experiences and where do they add value. And so one of the cool things we've been able to do together over the past year is run some focus groups and do a lot of listening. And would love for you to talk about some of the research centers on campus and how they play in the future of Winston-Salem State on the innovation side and what you're excited about looking ahead.
Yeah. So my graphic's a little dated, so I do need to update it. So we have 11 centers now as of this year. Our most recent largest center is our Behavioral Community Health Center. And so we're really excited about that center and what it's going to do for the community as far as providing addiction services, counseling, career development for those suffering addictions and veterans, and mental health support. So we're really excited about that one. The innovation we feel that will come out of that center is going to be, the application of how do I phrase this? the application of strategies to benefit very vulnerable populations. And because we are an HBCU, we tend to do very well with, culturally diverse populations who have been disenfranchised by the medical system for many, many years. And so we are very excited about what that center is going to do. We were also funded for a Center for Applied Data Sciences. And so that center is helping to integrate data science into multiple disciplines, right? And we see this, there's been an explosion of the importance of data science in the last 8 to 10 years. And so, so we're excited that this center is going to be doing that, again, from a broadening participation perspective of engaging members from, Black and Brown communities to do this work. And then we have our Center for the Study of Economic Mobility, which is probably 3 years running at this point for being nationally ranked for increasing economic mobility, through our institution. And so we are extremely proud of the applied research that center is doing to impact the daily lives of members in the community through its research. So we have a number of centers that we're really, really excited about that are doing great things. Our Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, supports young entrepreneurs in the the venture capitalism space, right? And so we're excited about what future opportunities in that space will look like, through support from the McKinsey funds and through your company's work to be able to support what we're trying to do. So we're really excited about these centers and where they're going to go in the next few years.
That's awesome. I'm here with Dr. Erin Lynch from Winston-Salem State University, and we always have a session on the Barriers for Breakfast Live where we kind of give last word or something they want to leave the audience with. And I think listening to you today, I'll take a first stab of something that really sort of resonates with me, and that's that I had a chance recently to collaborate with a gentleman at the University of Kentucky, Johnny Collette, who's a longtime friend, and he was talking about, no matter where you are, whether you're a first year student, whether you're a middle manager or an AVP or a provost or a chancellor, that there are certain things you can do from your role to advance the work. And one of the things that I see a lot of times is people, well, we don't have enough money, or we don't have enough this or whatever. But what most leaders really covet is advance the work, be creative, like show us what you think you might do. Let us, adjust the sails, etc. But I've been intrigued in our relationship this year, how no matter what the circumstances, whether it's going completely online, whether it's, reacting to when research dollars are going to come in, or, when things are going to be scheduled, there's this notion, I think, of it, advance the work, like each week, figure out something that's going to get us to the next place. And I think, we live in a society that can, in those 3 pandemics, be fearful, worried. But if you just get up every day and every week and advance a proposition or an idea or a concept, most people that are receiving that are like, thank you, that's great. And I can give you some feedback. So, I want all of our innovators, future innovators, to know that that's a really key for me in hearing your story. Would there be one idea that you would say, look, if you take anything else from this time, do this, like start here?
Yeah. So I like that. I want to build on what you said, right? Because, as you were talking, it really resonated with me with growth versus fixed mindset, right? And I think that's where I would want potential innovators to, that's the space I want them to play in, right? Is that growth mindset, right? Just never become complacent with, your limitation of resources, your limitation of tools, your limitation of whatever the limitations are. Because once you start limiting yourself, then you're not able to move the work forward, right? Whatever that work may be, you're not able to move it forward. I have innovators on campus now. I mean, we've had an influx, right, of researchers now who are so excited about trying to bring their ideas to market. And we don't have unlimited resources, but we're
Right.
sure as heck going to fight to be able to get that
Right.
idea,
That's
to
right.
market through our growth mindset and really trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we have access to and how can we leverage other resources to do it? So I would definitely say for innovators, future entrepreneurs, people who, are dabbling in the research space, and I don't mean like you're just reading posts on social media, but like actual
Right.
research, right? Oh, I did the research. I read a social
Yeah.
media post.
Yeah.
But actual researchers who are delving deep into, what the literature says and what, the data say. Just make sure that you're doing that with a growth mindset, so that you can continue to move the work forward.
That's great. I think that does more than build on it. It gives us a way to look at those terms, to look them up, Carol Dweck's work, and kind of
Absolutely.
say, that's how you move it. So thank you for being with us today. We're going to have an opportunity to kind of give some nuggets of what you've said to the listeners moving forward. And I know I'll see you on campus shortly. And we had a great meeting today with your provost, and so excited to be walking into 21-22, getting to collaborate with you. So we'll see you soon, Erin.
All right. Take care.
Take care.